The hallway was dim, just the glow from the nursery nightlight spilling across marble floors that cost more than most people earned in a year. Grace had one arm hooked under her daughter's knees, the other cradling her head, trying to keep Chloe's sleeping weight balanced while she fumbled for her car keys. She'd parked 2 blocks away. Closer felt too dangerous, too visible. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she shifted toward the service entrance, the one Eleanor had shown her earlier that week, the one nobody used. Then a hand closed around her wrist, not rough, gentle, almost, but absolute. Leaving already? She knew that voice. 6 years hadn't changed the low timbre of it, the way it seemed to fill whatever space it occupied. Grace turned slowly, already feeling the color drain from her face, and there he was, Sebastian Kane, standing in his mother's hallway at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, still wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. He looked older, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, silver threading through the dark hair at his temples. But those eyes, God, those eyes hadn't changed at all. Grey-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean, like winter light through ice, like Chloe's. She watched his gaze drop to the child in her arms, watched something shift in his expression. Confusion first, then calculation, then something that looked almost like pain. How old is she? His voice came out rough, breaking on the last word. Grace's mouth went dry. Chloe stirred against her shoulder, making that small sound she always made before waking, the one that sounded like a question. In another second, those eyes would open, those impossible, undeniable eyes. And then there would be no hiding, no explaining away, no pretending this was anything other than what it was. Sebastian? Eleanor's voice floated down from the 2nd floor landing. I didn't know you were coming by. He didn't look away from Grace. She could see him doing the math, counting backward, his jaw tightening with each passing second. Chloe's head shifted, her small hand reaching up to rub at her face, and Grace knew she had maybe 10 seconds before her daughter woke up fully and said something, asked something, made this situation impossible to walk away from. How old? Not a question this time. A demand. Eleanor's footsteps on the stairs, getting closer. Chloe's eyes fluttering open. That perfect grey-blue focusing first on Grace, then sliding past her to the man standing too close. The one she'd never met. The one whose face she saw every time she looked in a mirror. Sebastian's breath caught. Just a hitch, barely audible. But Grace heard it. Watched his hand drop from her wrist like she'd burned him. Is she mine? Before we go any further, and trust me, what happens next is going to turn everything upside down. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started, and what Grace says next is going to change 3 lives forever. Drop a heart. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice, the kind where every option feels like losing, but to understand how we got here, to this moment in this hallway with 6 years of secrets between them, we need to go back. Back to Tuesday morning, when everything started to unravel. The envelope had been cream-colored, expensive, the kind of paper stock that whispered old money and older power. Grace had found it wedged in her apartment door when she got home from her 2nd shift, still wearing the coffee shop apron under her jacket because she'd have to leave for the overnight cleaning job in 3 hours and there was no point changing twice. Her landlord had upgraded to fancy eviction notices, she'd thought, very classy. But inside was a letter, typed on Kane estate letterhead, offering employment, housekeeper position, salary that made her stop breathing, full benefits, including health insurance that would cover pre-existing conditions. That last part had made her sit down right there on her apartment floor, still holding the envelope. Chloe's medication cost $1,400 a month. The emergency room visit last week had been another $2,000. They didn't have. Grace worked 3 jobs and still bought groceries with coins, still chose between electricity and heat, still woke up every morning wondering which bill she could ignore for another week. And Chloe's eyes, those grey-blue eyes that definitely, absolutely weren't Grace's, weren't her father's, weren't anyone's in her family going back 3 generations. Those eyes needed to see a specialist. The school had sent home a letter. There might be a problem. There might be a lot of problems. But problems cost money. And money was the one thing Grace had run out of approximately 5 years ago. She'd made a promise. 6 years back, she'd taken Eleanor Kane's check and Eleanor Kane's certainty that she wasn't good enough, would never be good enough. And she'd promised herself she would disappear, that she'd stay disappeared, that she would never ever go back to that world, to those people, to the memory of Sebastian's number going straight to voicemail for the 47th time. But Chloe needed her medication. Chloe needed to see the specialist. Chloe needed things that pride couldn't buy and promises couldn't fix. Grace made the call. Thursday, 2 o'clock. She was going back. Comment, truth, if you think she should tell Eleanor who she really is, because that decision is about to get a whole lot more complicated. She'd cut her hair, lost 20 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, stress and poverty doing what no diet ever could. Started using her middle name on the application. Rose instead of Grace, common enough that it didn't feel like a complete lie. It had been 6 years. Eleanor Kane employed dozens of people. The woman had met her exactly 3 times, and 2 of those had been in dim restaurant lighting. Grace had banked everything on invisibility, and it worked. Eleanor had opened the door herself, still elegant at 65, still carrying that particular brand of wealth that looked effortless because it had never been anything else. She'd looked right at Grace, right through her really, and extended one perfectly manicured hand. "Rose, is it? Come in." No flicker of recognition, no pause. Grace felt something crack open in her chest, relief and hurt mixing into something she couldn't quite name. 6 years ago, she'd been someone worth paying off at least, worth the price of making disappear. Now she was just the help. Eleanor led her through rooms that smelled like lemon polish and loneliness, pointing out details that mattered. The Waterford crystal, the Turkish rugs, the oil paintings of Kane ancestors who'd made their fortune in steel and shipping and ruthless business decisions. The house was beautiful, empty, quiet in a way that felt wrong, like a stage waiting for actors who'd forgotten their cues. "I had more staff once," Eleanor said, pausing in the library. "But I found I preferred less chaos. My husband passed 4 years ago. The house feels rather large now." There was something in her voice, something Grace recognized because she heard it in her own sometimes. Late at night when Chloe was asleep and the walls pressed in, loneliness, the kind money couldn't fix. "I have a son," Eleanor continued, running one finger along a shelf of leather-bound books that probably cost more than Grace's entire education. "Sebastian. He runs the company now, does quite well. He never married." Grace's lungs forgot how to work. "There was a girl once." Eleanor wasn't looking at her, was still focused on those expensive books like they held answers she'd been searching for. "Years ago, I thought she was, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. She took money and disappeared. He's never been quite the same since." The irony sat bitter on Grace's tongue. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek, using pain to keep words from spilling out. "She would have given me grandchildren," Eleanor said, and now she did turn, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been regret. "I'm certain of it." Grace accepted the house key because refusing would have raised questions. It was heavy, old-fashioned brass that probably opened a lock original to the house. The weight of it in her palm felt like theft, felt like evidence, felt like the universe had a cruel sense of humor, and she was the punchline. She'd left before she could say something unforgivable, before she could laugh or cry or scream. Type run if you think Grace should quit right now, or stay if you want to see where this goes, though I think we both know she can't afford to run, can she? But here's what you need to understand about that day 6 years ago, the day that set all of this in motion. The day Eleanor Kane had sat across from Grace in a hotel restaurant so expensive the menu didn't list prices and explained exactly how the world worked. Eleanor had arrived 15 minutes late, unapologetic, with a leather portfolio that matched her handbag. She'd ordered sparkling water and a salad she never touched. Grace had been too nervous to order anything. "My son thinks he's in love with you." Eleanor had said it the way someone might comment on the weather. Factual, slightly tedious. "He said the word marriage. I thought we should have a conversation." The check had already been written. Grace could see it, tucked inside the portfolio, the amount visible just enough to make her stomach drop. $50,000. More money than she'd ever seen. More than her mother made in 2 years. Sebastian is 28, Eleanor had continued. He's being groomed to take over a company worth $3 billion. His future includes a certain kind of partner. Someone from the right background, the right education, the right everything. She'd slid the check across the table. You seem like a smart girl. Smart enough to understand that love is a lovely idea, but it doesn't pay for the lifestyle my son is accustomed to. It doesn't open the right doors or make the right connections. And it certainly doesn't last when reality sets in, when he realizes what he's given up, who he's disappointed. Grace had stared at those numbers. 50,000. She'd been 22, working 2 jobs to afford a degree she'd never finish, living in an apartment where the heat only worked half the time. My son called you a mistake, Eleanor had said, and her voice had been gentle, almost kind. Not to your face, of course. He's too well-bred for that. But to his father 3 weeks ago. Said he'd made a mistake getting involved with someone so unsuitable. He wanted advice on how to end things without hurting you. The words had landed like physical blows. I'm simply expediting the inevitable, saving you both the messier version of this. Take the money, disappear. Give him the clean break he's too kind to execute himself. Grace had called Sebastian 47 times over the next 2 days. 47 times his phone had rung through to voicemail, his voice asking her to leave a message sounding more distant with each attempt. On the 48th call, the number was disconnected. 3 weeks later, she'd been hunched over a toilet in a gas station bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines and understanding with perfect clarity that she was about to raise a child alone. She'd kept the money, kept the secret. And when Chloe was born with those impossible grey-blue eyes, when the nurse had handed Grace her daughter and she'd seen Sebastian's face reflected in miniature, she'd made a choice. Eleanor Kane had paid her to disappear, so that's exactly what she'd done. But here's the part that made everything so much worse, the detail that kept Grace awake at night, when Eleanor had written that check, when she'd said those words about Sebastian calling her a mistake. Grace had already been 2 months pregnant. Already carrying the grandchild Eleanor claimed to want so desperately. If you're feeling this story, hit that subscribe button because Grace's secret is about to get a whole lot more complicated. Drop a like if you think Eleanor deserves what's coming, and stick around because we still haven't answered Sebastian's question. Is she mine? In that hallway, with Chloe waking up in her arms and Eleanor's footsteps getting closer, Grace opened her mouth to answer, and what came out changed everything. The fog was thick that Monday morning, the kind that turned the Kane estate into something from a storybook, all grey stone and climbing ivy appearing and disappearing like a memory you couldn't quite hold onto. Grace's car coughed its way up the long driveway, the engine making sounds that suggested it might give up entirely any day now, and in the back seat, Chloe pressed her face to the window, breath fogging the glass. "It's like a castle," Chloe whispered, and there was wonder in her voice, the kind of pure delight that only 5-year-olds could manage. "Do you think there's a dragon?" "Just your new friend," Grace said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Remember what we talked about? Mrs. Kane is very nice, but she's also very busy, so you need to be on your best behavior." Chloe nodded solemnly, already smoothing down the purple dress Grace had found at the thrift store, the one with the slightly frayed hem that Chloe insisted made it look vintage. She clutched Mr. Buttons under one arm, the stuffed rabbit who'd been everywhere with her since she was 2, his left ear held on by 3 stitches, and hope. Eleanor opened the door before they'd even knocked, and Grace felt her stomach drop, because Eleanor was smiling, actually smiling, and she'd changed into a softer sweater, powder blue instead of her usual severe black, and there were fresh flowers in the entryway that definitely hadn't been there Friday. "You must be Chloe," Eleanor said, and she crouched down, actually lowered herself to Chloe's eye level in a way that probably cost her dignity and maybe her knees. "I've heard so much about you." Chloe studied her with those 2 observant eyes, the ones that saw everything, understood too much. "You have a grandma-shaped face," she announced. "That's a scientific observation, not a rude thing. My teacher says scientists observe. You look like you'd give good hugs and make cookies." Grace wanted to die. Right there, just sink through Eleanor Kane's imported marble and disappear forever. But Eleanor laughed. Actually laughed. this bright sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised Grace. "Is that so? Well, I do make cookies. Would you like to help me test a batch? I made them this morning, but I'm not sure if they're any good." "That's a lie," Chloe said cheerfully, taking Eleanor's offered hand like they'd known each other forever. "Adults always know if their cookies are good. You just want company while you eat them. That's okay. Being alone is sad." Grace followed them into the kitchen, feeling like she'd stepped into an alternate reality where Eleanor Kane baked cookies and smiled at children and didn't look at Grace's daughter like she was a problem that needed solving. The kitchen smelled like butter and sugar and something with cinnamon, and there was indeed a cooling rack on the counter, loaded with cookies that looked professionally made because of course they did. Eleanor probably couldn't do anything halfway. Chloe climbed onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. Mr. Buttons positioned carefully beside her and accepted a cookie with the gravity of a diplomat accepting a peace treaty. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and pronounced, "These are excellent. You should make them more often. Cookies make everything better." "Do they?" Eleanor settled onto the stool beside her, and Grace saw something in her face, something soft and hungry and desperately lonely. "What if you're sad about something cookies can't fix?" "Then you need more cookies," Chloe said seriously, "and also someone to talk to. Mama says talking helps. Do you have someone to talk to?" Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her own cookie. "Not really. Not anymore." "You can talk to me," Chloe offered. "I'm an excellent listener. Mama says I ask too many questions, but questions are how you learn things. Did you know that whales can talk to each other across whole oceans? That's what I want to be when I grow up. Someone who understands languages nobody else speaks." "That's a wonderful goal." Eleanor's voice was thick, emotion creeping in around the edges. "You know, I had a son who used to sit right where you're sitting. He'd tell me about his day, about the things he learned. I miss that. I miss having someone to share cookies with." Chloe reached over and patted Eleanor's hand, the same gesture she used when Grace was sad, when the bills piled up and the world felt too heavy. "You're not alone now. I'm here, and Mama's here, even though she's pretending to clean that same spot on the counter for the 5th time. Grace jerked, realized she'd been standing frozen with a dish towel, watching this scene unfold like a car accident she couldn't prevent. Eleanor's eyes met hers over Chloe's head, and there was a question in them. Something Grace couldn't quite read. "Grandma Ellie," Chloe said suddenly, trying the words out like a new flavor. "That sounds nice. Can I call you that?" Eleanor went very still. Grace watched her throat work, watched her blink rapidly, watched 6 years of grief and regret and loneliness crack open right there in her expensive kitchen with the Italian tile and the custom cabinets. "You can call me that," Eleanor whispered, "if your mother doesn't mind." Every eye turned to Grace. Chloe's hopeful, Eleanor's carefully neutral, and Grace felt the weight of it, the impossible position she'd put herself in. Say no, and she'd have to explain why. Say yes, and she'd be letting Eleanor Kane play grandmother to the granddaughter she'd paid Grace to hide. The irony was so bitter she could taste it. Eleanor, baking cookies for the child she'd essentially rejected before she was born. Eleanor, lighting up at Chloe's presence, desperate for family, for connection, for the very thing she'd destroyed 6 years ago with a check and cold certainty. "It's fine," Grace heard herself say, and she wondered if hatred could crack, if it could develop fault lines when faced with something as simple as an old woman's loneliness and a child's kindness. Chloe beamed, swinging her legs happily, already reaching for another cookie. "See, everything's better already." But Grace knew better, knew that every moment Chloe spent here, every connection she built with Eleanor, every time she called this woman Grandma, the situation got more complicated, more impossible, more painful. Comment if you think Chloe knows more than she's letting on, because that kid sees everything, doesn't she? Eleanor pulled out coloring books after the cookies, expensive ones from a museum shop, and set up Chloe at the kitchen island with markers that probably cost more than Grace's weekly grocery budget. Grace excused herself to start on the actual work she was being paid for, but she could hear them through the house. Chloe's constant stream of observations and questions, Eleanor's responses getting warmer, more animated, more alive with each passing hour. By lunch, Grace found them in the library, Chloe curled up in a leather chair that swallowed her small frame. Eleanor reading to her from an illustrated book about constellations. The chair had been Sebastian's when he was small. Grace knew because there was a photo on Eleanor's desk. Young Sebastian in that exact chair, same serious expression, same grey-blue eyes focused on a book too advanced for his age. Chloe sat in that chair the same way, with the same intensity, and Grace wondered how Eleanor couldn't see it, couldn't recognize her own blood sitting there absorbing information like it was oxygen. "Did you know," Chloe interrupted Eleanor's reading, "that some stars we see are already dead? We're looking at light from the past. Mama says memories are like that too, still bright even when the real thing is gone." Eleanor set the book down slowly. "Your mama sounds very wise." "She's sad a lot," Chloe said, with the blunt honesty children wielded like weapons without meaning to. "She tries to hide it, but I can tell. She gets this look, like she's somewhere else, somewhere that hurts." "Sometimes," Eleanor said carefully, "we make choices we think are right at the time. And then later we realize we were wrong, but by then it's too late to fix things." "It's never too late," Chloe insisted. "That's what Mama tells me. You can always say sorry. You can always try again." Eleanor's laugh was broken, jagged. "What if the person you need to say sorry to is gone? What if you push them away so hard they can never come back?" Chloe considered this with the seriousness she gave to all important questions. "Then you have to be sorry anyway, and you have to be better for the next person, so you don't make the same mistake twice." Grace stood in the doorway, listening to her 5-year-old daughter counsel a billionaire on regret, and something shifted in her chest. Eleanor wasn't just lonely. She was drowning in the consequences of her own choices, living in this enormous house with nothing but ghosts and what-ifs. But that didn't make what she'd done okay. Didn't erase the cruelty of that hotel restaurant, the certainty in her voice when she'd called Grace unsuitable, the check that had said more clearly than words that some people were worth paying to disappear. By the end of the week, Chloe and Eleanor had developed routines. Story time in the library. Cookies on Monday. Eleanor taught Chloe a card game her own grandmother had taught her, something complicated with suits and strategies that Chloe picked up immediately because of course she did. Grace would find them bent over cards, Chloe explaining her logic, Eleanor actually listening like this small person's opinions mattered. Friday afternoon, Eleanor pulled Grace aside while Chloe was absorbed in a nature documentary about octopuses. She handed Grace an envelope, heavier than a normal paycheck. "There's a bonus," Eleanor said. "And I've arranged for you and Chloe to be added to the company health insurance. It covers dependents, covers pre-existing conditions. I noticed you mentioned she needed to see a specialist." Grace stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "That's too much. I haven't done anything to deserve—" "You brought light back into this house," Eleanor interrupted, and her voice was fierce, almost desperate. "I wake up Monday mornings and actually look forward to the day. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious?" She reached out, stopped just short of touching Grace's arm. "Let me do this. Let me be part of her life, even if it's just as a borrowed grandmother. Let me matter to someone again." And Grace, God help her, agreed, nodded, took the envelope, accepted the insurance cards Eleanor pressed into her hand. Because Chloe needed that specialist, because the medication costs were breaking her, because Eleanor didn't know the truth, and as long as she didn't know, this could work. But telling her the truth would destroy everything, would turn this fragile piece into something ugly. Eleanor would have to face that she'd driven away her own granddaughter, paid off her own family. And Grace would have to face Eleanor's rage, or worse, her grief. So Grace said nothing. Took the money, took the insurance, took the risk. Heart this, if Eleanor is breaking your heart too. Because mine's in pieces watching her fall in love with a granddaughter she doesn't know is hers. The following Monday, autumn had arrived with authority, rain turning the morning dark and cold. Grace's car had refused to start, so they'd walked the 4 blocks from the bus stop, arriving at the Kane estate damp and shivering. Chloe's teeth were chattering, but she was laughing, spinning in puddles like they were on an adventure instead of late and soaked. Grace used her key, called out as they entered through the kitchen door, already apologizing for their appearance, for the trail of water they were leaving on Eleanor's expensive floors, and froze. Because Sebastian was there, sitting at the kitchen island where Chloe had eaten cookies, where she'd told Eleanor about whales and stars and loneliness. He was dressed for the office, dark suit, probably Italian, tie perfectly knotted, looking at his phone with the kind of intense focus that came from running a billion-dollar company before most people had finished their first coffee. 6 years collapsed. 6 years of running, hiding, building a life without him. And there he was, real and solid and close enough to touch. Grace's world tilted. The floor felt unstable. Her lungs forgot their function. She must have made a sound, because he looked up, eyes scanning her face with perfect indifference. No recognition, not even a flicker of memory. To him, she was just the help. Wet, interrupting, irrelevant. "Sebastian?" Eleanor appeared from the direction of her study, smiling. "I wasn't expecting you this early. Traffic must have been light." Meeting got moved. His attention was already back on his phone, dismissing Grace entirely. "I came to grab the contracts you mentioned." "Of course, I'll get them. But first," Eleanor gestured to Grace, who stood paralyzed in the doorway, hand still on Chloe's shoulder. "This is Rose, our new housekeeper. And this," her voice went soft, warm, the tone she only used for one person now, "is Chloe." Sebastian's nod was perfunctory, polite but distant. The acknowledgement you'd give to furniture that talked, and it shouldn't have hurt. Grace had no right to expect recognition, to want him to remember, to hope that what they'd had meant enough to survive 6 years and a drastic haircut and the weight loss that poverty provided. But it hurt anyway. Stabbed clean through. Then Chloe, oblivious to adult complications, walked right up to him, tilted her head to the side in that considering way she had, studying him like he was a problem to solve. "Why are you so sad?" she asked. Sebastian blinked, put down his phone, looked at this small dripping child who'd just asked him what no one else dared to. "I'm not sad." "You are," Chloe insisted. "Your eyes are sad, and your shoulders are all tight. Mama gets like that when she's trying not to cry. It's okay to be sad, but it's better to talk about it." And Grace watched something impossible happen. Watched Sebastian actually look at Chloe, really look, and she saw the exact moment the resemblance hit him. The way his expression shifted from polite dismissal to confusion. The way his head tilted to match hers. The exact same angle, the exact same thoughtful consideration, like looking in a mirror, like seeing a ghost. His eyes, grey-blue storm cloud eyes that Grace had memorized 6 years ago, stared into Chloe's identical gaze. The same unusual shade, the same intensity, the same way of seeing straight through to the truth of things. "How old are you?" His voice had gone rough. "5, Chloe said cheerfully, reaching out to pat his hand like she'd patted Eleanor's. That same gesture of comfort, of connection. "But I'll be 6 in January. Mama says I'm wise beyond my years. That means I understand things most kids don't." She squeezed his fingers, and Grace saw his breath catch, saw him staring at their hands, his large and scarred from expensive hobbies, hers small and still dimpled with baby fat, like he was seeing something he couldn't quite believe. "It's okay to be sad," Chloe repeated gently, "but it's better to talk about it. That's what Grandma Ellie says. She's teaching me that it's brave to feel things." "Grandma Ellie?" Sebastian's eyes shot to Eleanor, question marks everywhere. "It's just a nickname," Eleanor said quickly, but there was guilt in her voice, like she'd been caught at something. "Chloe's been coming with Rose. I didn't think you'd mind." His attention swung back to Chloe, and Grace could see him cataloguing details. The grey-blue eyes, the way her hair fell, dark with rain but lighter at the ends, the same caramel shade his got in summer, the tilt of her head, the thoughtful expression, the small habits that were his habits, genetic memory expressing itself in this child he'd never met. But he didn't connect it, couldn't connect it, because why would he? The girl he'd dated 6 years ago had taken money and disappeared. She wouldn't be cleaning his mother's house, wouldn't be standing in front of him with a daughter who looked like... "How old did you say she was?" He asked Grace directly, his eyes finally meeting hers, and still nothing, no recognition, just a question. "5, Grace managed, her voice barely working. The math was right there. Simple subtraction. 5 years old meant conception 6 years ago. Meant the timeline aligned perfectly with when they'd been together. But Sebastian had already dismissed them both, was already standing, straightening his tie, reaching for the contracts Eleanor handed him. "I have to go. I'm already late." He paused at the door, looked back one more time at Chloe, that same confused expression crossing his face. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, the sound of his car starting up moments later. Grace's knees gave out. She grabbed the counter for support, breathing too fast, heart trying to break through her ribs. Eleanor was beside her immediately. "Are you all right? You're pale." "Chloe, sweetheart, can you go dry off in the bathroom? There are fresh towels in the cabinet." Chloe scampered off, still humming, completely unaware that she'd just met her father, that the sad man with her eyes was the reason Grace woke up crying sometimes, the reason they lived the way they did. "I'm fine," Grace lied. "Just cold. The walk from the bus." But she wasn't fine. She was breaking apart, held together by nothing but will and lies and the desperate hope that no one would look too closely at the 5-year-old girl who had Sebastian Kane's face. Comment: "He knows, or he's clueless." What do you think? Did he see the truth, or is he too blind to recognize his own daughter? The week crawled by. Grace cleaned Eleanor's house with her heart in her throat, waiting for Sebastian to show up again, to ask more questions, to finally connect the pieces that were right in front of him. Every car on the driveway made her jump. Every phone call Eleanor took might be him, asking about the child with familiar eyes. But he didn't come, didn't call. Eleanor mentioned he was traveling for business, Singapore or Dubai, or somewhere else that required obscene amounts of money to reach. Grace should have been relieved, should have been grateful for the reprieve. Instead, she was just tired. Tired of running, tired of lying, tired of watching Chloe fall in love with a grandmother who didn't know they were family, because Chloe had fallen, completely, wholeheartedly. She asked every morning if it was a work day, if they'd see Grandma Ellie. She talked about Eleanor constantly, things she'd said, games they'd played, stories she'd told about when Sebastian was small, and Eleanor had transformed. The cold, lonely woman from that first interview was gone, replaced by someone softer, someone who laughed, someone who kept the kitchen stocked with ingredients for cookies and hot chocolate, someone who bought Chloe books about space and oceans, and left them wrapped on the kitchen counter like surprise presents. The house felt different too, alive somehow. Eleanor had opened curtains that had been closed for years, had started playing music in the mornings, had hired a gardener to revive flower beds that had gone wild, all because of Chloe. All because a 5-year-old girl had walked into her life and reminded her what it felt like to matter to someone. Grace's hatred was cracking. She'd tried to hold on to it, tried to remember Eleanor's cruelty, the check, the dismissal. But it was hard to hate someone when you watched them teach your daughter to play piano, when you overheard them discussing philosophy with the seriousness Chloe deserved, when you saw real love growing between them. But the truth sat like a stone in Grace's stomach. Every day she didn't tell Eleanor, the betrayal grew deeper. Every moment Chloe called her Grandma Ellie, the lie got bigger. And eventually, inevitably, someone would notice. Someone would see what Grace saw every time she looked at her daughter. Sebastian's face reflected in miniature. The resemblance was too strong, the eyes too distinctive. Friday was coming too fast. Grace planned to leave early, to be gone before there was any chance of Sebastian appearing. But Chloe had fallen asleep in the library, curled up in Sebastian's childhood chair with Mr. Buttons and a book about constellations. Grace had tried to wake her, but Chloe was deeply asleep. The kind of exhausted sleep that came from growing too fast and thinking too hard. Grace couldn't carry her and all their things. Couldn't risk waking her when she'd been up coughing the night before, when the specialist appointment next week might bring bad news they weren't ready for. So she waited. Sat in Eleanor's kitchen, watching the clock, praying Sebastian would stay wherever he was for just another hour. But prayers didn't work in the Kane household. Never had. She heard the car in the driveway, the distinctive sound of an engine that cost more than most people's houses. heard the front door open, Sebastian's voice calling out to his mother, and Grace was moving, running to the library, scooping up Chloe, who mumbled sleepily but didn't wake, grabbing their bag with her free hand, heading for the kitchen door, the service entrance. Escape. Rose, wait. Not Rose. Never Rose in that voice. With that tone. She turned slowly, Chloe's weight heavy in her arms, and there he was, Sebastian, standing in the hallway with Eleanor beside him, and his face had changed. The polite dismissal was gone. In its place was something harder. Calculation, suspicion. His hand touched her arm. Light, barely contact. But it might as well have been lightning. 6 years evaporated. She was 22 again, falling in love with someone she couldn't have, believing in futures that didn't exist. Their eyes met, and she watched recognition finally break through, watched memory resurface, watched him see past the shorter hair and weight loss and tired eyes to the girl he'd known before. Grace? His voice cracked on her name, disbelief and shock, and something that might have been pain. Grace? His gaze dropped to Chloe in her arms, to her face, peaceful in sleep, to those grey-blue eyes hidden behind closed lids, but impossible to forget once you'd seen them. How old did you say she was? Not a question this time, an accusation. 5, Grace whispered, and watched the math click into place, watched understanding dawn in those familiar eyes. You took my mother's money and disappeared. His voice was ice, controlled, furious. You took $50,000 and I took it because you called me a mistake. The words ripped out of her before she could stop them. Because you wouldn't return my calls. Because your mother told me you wanted me gone. Because I was 22 and pregnant and terrified. Eleanor had gone white, absolutely colorless. Pregnant? Chloe stirred, starting to wake, and Grace knew with perfect certainty that everything was about to come apart. Smash that like button if you're stressed right now, because what happens next changes everything. And subscribe so you don't miss how this family collision ends. Drop a comment, Team Eleanor, Team Sebastian, or Team Run for Your Life. Sebastian was staring at Chloe with dawning horror. She's mine. Not a question, a statement, an accusation, a revelation that was 6 years too late. Yes, Grace said, and the word felt like surrender, like the end of everything. Chloe's eyes fluttered open, grey-blue and confused, focusing on the 3 adults staring at her like she was a bomb about to explode. Mama? What's wrong? Why is everyone sad? Sebastian's hand dropped from Grace's arm. He took a step back, then another, like distance might help him process this. Eleanor had sunk into a chair, one hand pressed to her mouth. You have a son, Sebastian said slowly, looking at his mother. That's what you told me, that she had a son, that he was someone else's, that she'd used you to get money and disappeared. I never... Eleanor's voice failed, tried again. I never said that. You did. Sebastian's voice was getting louder, control slipping. 3 years ago, when I finally asked about her, you said she'd had a child, a boy, that she'd moved on, that I should too. Grace's world tilted again. You asked about me? But no one was listening to her. Sebastian and Eleanor were locked in some confrontation that had been building for years, and Chloe was fully awake now, watching everything with those 2 observant eyes. You lied to me, Sebastian said, and there was devastation in his voice. For 6 years you lied to me. I have a daughter. I have a daughter, and you called her a mistake. Eleanor stood up, her own control breaking. You came to your father and me, said you'd made a mistake, that you needed help ending things. So I helped. I did what you asked. I said the relationship was complicated. Sebastian's hands were shaking. I said I didn't know how to bridge the gap between her world and ours. I was asking for advice, not asking you to pay her off. Chloe started crying, silent tears first, then hiccuping sobs, confused and scared and overwhelmed. Grace held her tighter, started backing toward the door. Don't! Sebastian's voice stopped her. Don't you dare run. Not again. Not now. I have to go, Grace said. She's scared. This is too much. She's my daughter. The words seemed to hurt him. I've missed 5 years. 5 years of her life because you took money and because your mother told me you didn't want me. Grace was yelling now too. Couldn't help it. Because I called 47 times and you never picked up. Because I was pregnant and alone, and your mother made it very clear that I would never be good enough for this family. Eleanor had tears streaming down her face. I thought I was protecting him. I thought you were using him for money. I thought, oh, you thought I wasn't good enough, Grace finished. You were right. I'm not. I never was. But she held Chloe tighter. She deserves better than all of us. And before anyone could stop her, before Sebastian could say whatever he was about to say, before Eleanor could reach for the granddaughter she just discovered she had, Grace was out the door, running through the rain, Chloe sobbing against her shoulder, their whole fragile life shattering behind them. The question came out so quietly that for a second, the rain almost drowned it out. Sebastian stood there in Eleanor's driveway, water streaming down his face, his expensive suit already ruined, and asked the question that would change everything. Is she mine? The woman he'd known 6 years ago, the one he'd lost, the one he'd mourned, the one standing in front of him, now holding a sleeping child against her chest, went absolutely still. Her eyes met his, and he saw the calculation there, the weighing of options. She could lie, could say no, could claim coincidence, could run again. Instead, she said, yes. 1 word, 3 letters, a confession and an accusation, and the end of the world Sebastian thought he'd been living in. He heard Eleanor's sharp intake of breath behind him, heard her move forward like she might intervene, might try to control this situation the way she'd controlled everything else. But he held up one hand, stopping her without looking, his entire focus on the woman in front of him. You knew, he said to his mother, his voice dead, empty. You paid her to leave. And you knew. I didn't know she was pregnant. Eleanor's voice was desperate, pleading. You have to believe me, Sebastian. I didn't know about Chloe. If I had... You would have what? He turned on her now, all the fury he'd been holding back pouring out. Paid her more? Threatened her? Made sure she understood that Kane grandchildren only count when they're legitimate, when they come from the right kind of mother? Eleanor flinched like he'd struck her. I looked for you. Sebastian's attention swung back to the woman holding his daughter. For 2 years I looked, hired investigators, drove to every city you'd mentioned visiting, called every number I could find connected to your name, your old roommate, your former employers. I went to the university you talked about attending. His voice cracked. I looked everywhere. She was staring at him like he'd started speaking a language she didn't understand. Your mother said you didn't want me. Said you'd called me a mistake. That you wanted me gone. I'd never... Sebastian couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't process the depth of his mother's betrayal, couldn't reconcile the woman who'd raised him with someone who would destroy lives this completely. What exactly did she say to you? But before she could answer, Chloe stirred, shifted in her mother's arms, made a small sound, and her eyes opened slowly, focusing first on her mother, then on Sebastian, then on Eleanor standing behind him. Hi, Chloe said, her voice sleepy and small. You came back. Sebastian didn't trust himself to speak, didn't know what to say to this child, his child, who was looking at him with those impossible eyes, with his father's face reflected in miniature. Are you still sad? Chloe asked, and the question was so direct, so innocent, that something in Sebastian's chest cracked clean through. He managed a sound that might have been agreement, might have been a sob. Chloe reached out one small hand, patted his arm the way she'd patted Eleanor's hand in the kitchen, that gesture of comfort that seemed instinctive to her. Mama says sad doesn't last forever. It just feels like it does. She knows because she's been sad for a really long time. Since before I was born, I think. Her mother made a choked sound, pulled Chloe closer. Baby, we need to go home. You're getting cold. But the sad man is still sad, Chloe protested. We can't leave when people are sad. That's the rule. Sebastian looked at this 5-year-old who'd inherited his eyes and apparently his father's moral certainty, and felt something shift inside him. This was his daughter. And she'd been in the world for 5 years without him knowing, without him being there, without him having any chance to be the father she deserved. His voice failed. He tried again. Can I touch her? Just for a second? The woman holding Chloe hesitated, and Sebastian saw the war on her face, fear and hope and exhaustion all tangled together. Finally, she nodded. Sebastian reached out with a hand that was shaking, touched Chloe's hair with a reverence usually reserved for holy things. Her curls were soft, slightly damp from the rain, and they wound around his fingers like they were reaching back. You're warm, Chloe observed. Your hands are really big. Are you a giant? His laugh came out broken, devastating. No, sweetheart, I'm just a man who wishes he'd known you sooner. Chloe tilted her head, studying him with that intense focus he recognized from his own childhood photographs. Are you my daddy? The question hung in the rain-soaked air. Sebastian looked at her mother, saw tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain, saw her nod permission for him to answer. Would you want me to be? He asked carefully, because this child's opinion mattered, because he wouldn't force himself into her life if she didn't want him there. Chloe considered this with the seriousness she seemed to give everything. Depends. Do you tell good stories? Mama tells excellent stories, but she's always too tired. And do you know about stars? I really like stars. I can learn, Sebastian said, and meant it. Would learn anything, be anything, do anything to be part of this child's life. I can learn whatever you want me to know. Okay, Chloe said, like it was decided, like becoming a father was that simple. Then maybe. We'll try it and see if you're good at it. Sebastian's laugh was half sob. That's fair. Type, forgive him, or make him suffer. What should our girl do? Because this is complicated, and there's a lot of hurt to work through. The mother, he needed to start using her name, needed to say it out loud and reclaim it from 6 years of trying to forget, shifted Chloe's weight. We should go. It's late. She needs to sleep. Tomorrow, Sebastian said quickly, desperate. Can I see you tomorrow? Both of you? There's a coffee shop on Maple Street, the one with... I know the one. Her voice was soft, careful. 10 o'clock? Yes, please. He looked at Chloe, at this miracle he'd been denied. Please bring her. I want to know her. I want to know everything. She nodded, already moving toward her car, an ancient sedan that looked like it might not survive another winter. Sebastian watched her buckle Chloe into a car seat that had definitely seen better days, watched her climb into the driver's seat, watched 6 years of loss and lies pulling away down the driveway. Eleanor was beside him suddenly, her hand on his arm. Sebastian, I can explain. Don't. He stepped away from her touch, from her proximity, from everything she represented. Don't explain. Don't justify. Don't tell me you thought you were doing the right thing. You destroyed 3 lives because you couldn't accept that I might choose differently than you wanted. She wasn't right for you, Eleanor said, and there was still conviction in her voice, still certainty even in the face of catastrophic consequences. She had nothing, no family worth mentioning, no education, no connections. You were going to run a billion-dollar company. You needed someone who could... I needed the woman I loved, Sebastian interrupted, his voice ice. I needed someone who made me laugh, who challenged me, who saw me as something other than the Kane heir. And you took that from me, took her from me, took 5 years with my daughter from me. Eleanor's face crumpled. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to control me. He headed for his car, already pulling out his phone. I'm going home. Don't call me. Don't try to explain. I can't look at you right now without seeing everything you cost me. Sebastian, please. But he was already gone, driving too fast through rain that matched the storm in his chest, his mind racing through 6 years of what-ifs and if-onlys. Back at Eleanor's estate, she stood alone in the driveway, watching taillights disappear, understanding with perfect clarity that she'd lost them both. Her son, her granddaughter, the family she'd been so desperate to protect that she'd destroyed it instead. She went inside, climbed the stairs to the library, and pulled out the book that had started all of this. Wuthering Heights, the one she'd found on the shelf weeks ago and hadn't thought twice about. She opened it to the inscription she'd never bothered to read. "For my love, may we have a kinder ending than Heathcliff and Catherine. Always yours." The handwriting was Sebastian's. The date was 6 years ago, and the book had been in Eleanor's house, which meant the woman she'd paid off had brought it back, had been carrying it all along, had kept this piece of a love Eleanor had worked so hard to destroy. Eleanor sank into Sebastian's childhood chair, the one Chloe had slept in earlier, and let herself break, because she'd played God with other people's lives, and now she was paying the price. Alone in a house too big for one person, with a granddaughter who called her Grandma Ellie without knowing the irony, with a son who looked at her like she was a stranger. She pulled out her phone, typed a message to Sebastian, "I'm so sorry for everything," stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without sending, because sorry didn't fix this. Sorry didn't give him back 5 years. Sorry didn't undo the cruelty of that hotel restaurant, the check she'd written, the certainty in her voice when she'd told a 22-year-old girl that she would never be good enough for the Kane family. Eleanor sat in the dark, holding the book, finally understanding the cost of playing God with other people's lives, and knowing that understanding came 6 years too late. Comment what you think happens at that coffee shop tomorrow, because this family has a lot to work through, and not all wounds heal clean. The apartment was smaller than Sebastian had imagined. 3rd floor walk-up, narrow stairs, the kind of building where you could hear your neighbors' conversations through the walls. The woman he'd loved, her name was caught in his throat, familiar and foreign at once, carried Chloe up those stairs, fumbled with keys that stuck in a lock that needed replacing, pushed open a door to reveal a space that was clean but sparse, decorated with love and no money. She tucked Chloe into a bed in the corner of the living room, no separate bedroom for a 5-year-old, and Sebastian thought about his own childhood bedroom, the one that was bigger than this entire apartment. Thought about the life his daughter could have had, should have had, if his mother hadn't decided to play God. Later, much later, after Chloe was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the sound of traffic outside, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't check it, was too exhausted for more confrontation, more revelations. But she looked anyway. "I'm sorry for whatever I did that made you think I wanted you gone, for not trying harder, for letting my mother convince me you'd moved on. I'm sorry for all of it." She stared at the words until they blurred, started to type a response, deleted it, started again. Another message came through before she could send anything. Her middle name? What is it? She typed slowly, carefully. "Eleanor. After your mother." The pause before his response felt eternal. Why? She could have lied, could have said it was a family name, a coincidence, anything other than the truth. But she was so tired of lying, of hiding, of carrying secrets that weighed more than she did. "I thought it would protect her. I thought if she carried that name, maybe the universe would be kinder. Maybe some of that Kane luck would rub off. Maybe I could give her something of yours, even if she could never have you." His response came quickly. Did it work? Her laugh was broken, bitter. "No, but she's perfect anyway. Despite everything, despite all of it, she's the best thing that ever happened to me. I can't wait to know her." There was vulnerability in those words, hope and fear tangled together. "I can't wait to know both of you again." And that did it. That broke her completely. She sat on her bathroom floor, phone clutched in shaking hands, and cried for the girl she'd been 6 years ago, the one who'd believed in happy endings, the one who'd thought love was enough, the one who'd called Sebastian 47 times and believed that if he just heard her voice, he'd fight for them. She cried for that girl, and for the man who'd loved her before his mother paid her to disappear. Hit subscribe if you're invested in this family now, because tomorrow's conversation at that coffee shop could either heal them or destroy them forever. Like this video. If you believe in second chances, in fighting for what matters, in families built from broken pieces, and stay tuned, because Eleanor's reckoning is far from over. Morning came too fast, and not fast enough. The coffee shop on Maple Street was the kind of place that smelled like fresh bread and possibility, Small tables crowded with people starting their days, sunlight streaming through windows that hadn't been cleaned in a while but somehow made the dust look intentional, like atmosphere. Sebastian was already there when they arrived, sitting at a corner table with 3 coffees and a hot chocolate that suggested he'd been hoping, planning, preparing for this moment. He looked like he hadn't slept. Shadows under those grey-blue eyes, his tie slightly crooked in a way that would have horrified him 6 years ago when image was everything. Chloe saw him first, broke free from her mother's hand, ran across the coffee shop with her purple dress streaming behind her. "Sad man, you came." Sebastian stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair, dropped to his knees to catch her, to be at her level. "I told you I would. I always will now." Over Chloe's head his eyes met her mother's, and the world narrowed to just that, the 2 of them. 6 years of loss between them, a daughter who connected them in ways they hadn't chosen but couldn't undo. "I never wanted you gone," Sebastian said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "I want you to know that. Whatever my mother told you, whatever lies she fed us both, I never wanted you gone." She sat down slowly, carefully, like the chair might collapse under the weight of this conversation. "Then why didn't you fight harder?" It was the question that had haunted her for 6 years, the one that woke her up at 3 in the morning, the one that turned love into bitterness, hope into resignation. Sebastian's face did something complicated. "Your number was disconnected within days. I went to your apartment. The landlord said you'd broken your lease, left no forwarding address. I called your work. They said you'd quit without notice. I tried your old roommate. She said you'd told her you needed a fresh start, that you were moving somewhere I'd never find you." He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture she remembered from when he was frustrated, trying to solve a problem that wouldn't cooperate. "My mother showed me a letter 3 months later, when I was still looking, when I was driving myself crazy trying to find you. It was on your stationery, the kind you used to leave notes on. It said," his voice cracked, "it said being with me had been a mistake, that you'd realized we were too different, that you'd taken the money she offered because you deserved compensation for wasted time. It asked that I never try to contact you again." The coffee shop noise faded. Chloe's chatter about Mr. Buttons became distant. Everything narrowed to Sebastian's face, to the devastation there, to the realization settling between them like winter cold. "What note?" Her voice came out wrong, too high, too sharp. "I never left a note. I never wrote any letter. I took the money and I left because your mother said you didn't want me, that you'd called me a mistake, that you'd asked her to handle it because you were too kind to break my heart yourself." Sebastian went white, absolutely colorless. "She showed me your signature. It looked exactly like your handwriting. I thought you meant it. I thought I'd misread everything between us." Understanding crashed over both of them simultaneously. Eleanor hadn't just paid her off and lied. She'd forged a letter, had fabricated evidence of rejection, had made sure that even if Sebastian looked, even if he fought, he'd find proof that she didn't want to be found. "What exactly did my mother say to you?" Sebastian's voice was cold now, controlled in a way that spoke of fury barely leashed. "In that hotel, word for word." So she told him about the restaurant with no prices on the menu, about the check already written, about Eleanor's certainty that she was unsuitable, inadequate, using him for money and status, about the explicit statement that Sebastian had called her a mistake, had asked for advice on ending things without hurting her. With every word, Sebastian's expression grew harder, colder, until he looked like a stranger, like someone capable of destroying companies, crushing competitors, making billion-dollar decisions without flinching. "She showed me a letter," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "Said you'd left it for me, that you'd signed it and asked never to be contacted. I kept it for 2 years, carried it in my wallet like proof that I was the idiot who'd fallen for someone who'd been using me all along." Their eyes met across the table, across 6 years of engineered separation, and the truth settled between them. Eleanor had lied to both of them, had forged evidence, had destroyed their relationship so completely that even when Sebastian looked for her, even when he tried to fight, he'd found proof that she didn't want to be found. Chloe interrupted the moment, oblivious to the weight of it, tugging on Sebastian's sleeve. "Are you fighting?" Mama says fighting is just talking with feelings. She says it's okay, as long as you're honest. Sebastian's laugh was broken, devastating. Your daughter is smarter than both of us. The correction came quietly, but it changed everything. Our daughter. Sebastian's face transformed. His eyes went bright with emotion, his breath caught, and for a second he looked exactly like he had 6 years ago when he'd told her he loved her for the first time. Vulnerable and hopeful and absolutely terrified. What happens now? He asked. She looked at Chloe, who was watching them both with those too observant eyes, trying to understand adult complications with a 5-year-old's logic. Looked at Sebastian, at the man she'd loved before the world got complicated, before money and power and manipulation destroyed something that should have been simple. We figure it out, she said carefully. Together, if you'll let me, if we can find a way past what your mother did. Can we have pancakes while we figure it out? Chloe asked, already looking at the menu with her serious concentration face. I think better with pancakes. It's science. Both of them laughed, despite everything, despite the hurt and the years and the impossibility of the situation. Sebastian flagged down a server, ordered pancakes without asking what kind because Chloe was already describing exactly what she wanted. Chocolate chips, but not too many, whipped cream, but only a little, and could she please have strawberries if they had them? When the server left, Sebastian looked at Chloe's mother and said, The usual, 2 creams, 1 sugar, extra foam. She stared at him. You remember my coffee order? I remember everything, he said quietly. I tried to forget, spent 6 years trying, but I remember all of it. Something in her chest loosened. Not forgiveness, that would take time, would take trust rebuilt from rubble, but possibility. The first crack in walls 6 years high. They talked for 2 hours, about custody, about co-parenting, about how to build something healthy from this wreckage, about Eleanor's role, or lack thereof, about the practical realities of bringing Sebastian into Chloe's life without disrupting everything she knew. There were no easy answers, no neat solutions, but there was honesty, finally, after 6 years of lies. Chloe sat between them, sticky with syrup, telling Sebastian about Mr. Button's life story, about her teacher who was nice but didn't understand that. Sometimes Chloe needed to think before answering, about the stars she wanted to visit someday when she grew up and became an astronaut, marine biologist, veterinarian. Sebastian listened like she was explaining the secrets of the universe, asked questions that showed he was actually paying attention, made notes on his phone when she mentioned things she liked, books about octopuses, the color purple, cookies but only the soft kind, stories about brave girls. And her mother watched them, watched her daughter meeting her father, watched 6 years of loss and possibility tangled together in a coffee shop on Maple Street. No resolution, no perfect ending, just a beginning, fragile and uncertain, built on ruins. If this story moved you, subscribe to Mr. Legacy Golden Stories for more tales about second chances, family secrets, and the complicated truth that people aren't just good or evil, they're human. Like this video. If you believe these two deserve happiness, comment what you think Eleanor should do to make this right, if anything can, and share this with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to fight for what matters. 1 week later, routines were starting to form, dinners twice a week at a neutral restaurant where Chloe could be loud, and Sebastian could learn what it meant to be a father to a 5-year-old who had opinions about everything. Park visits on weekends where he pushed her on swings and she explained cloud formations with the confidence of someone who'd read 1 book on meteorology and now considered herself an expert. Chloe had started calling him Daddy Bash, a nickname that made him tear up every time he heard it, that made him realize how much he'd missed, how many moments he'd lost to his mother's interference. Eleanor watched it all from the estate windows, uninvited to these moments, excluded by her own design. She'd called Sebastian 11 times in the past week. He'd answered none of them. Had sent 1 text that said simply, "Not ready to talk. Don't know when I will be." Her isolation was complete, self-imposed, deserved. Then a letter arrived at the apartment on Thursday morning, expensive cream stationery that made her stomach drop because she recognized it immediately. Eleanor's personal letterhead. The same kind of paper she'd used to write that job offer that had started this whole collision. Inside was another letter. Older, more yellowed. She unfolded it with shaking hands and saw her own signature at the bottom, or what looked like her signature, practiced and imperfect and guilty. The forged letter Eleanor had shown Sebastian, the one that said their relationship was a mistake, the one that had kept him from looking harder. Attached was a note in Eleanor's handwriting. I cannot undo what I've done, but I can stop hiding from it. This belongs to you both, so does the truth. I won't ask forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But Chloe deserves a grandmother who tells the truth, even when it destroys me. Her phone rang before she could process it. Sebastian's name on the screen. I got a letter, he said without preamble. From my mother. Me too. Long silence on the line. She could hear his breathing, could imagine his face, the war between fury and something that might be the beginning of forgiveness. What do we do? He asked. She looked at Chloe, who was at the table drawing with the expensive colored pencils Sebastian had bought her, the ones that came in a wooden case and cost more than their weekly grocery budget. The picture was of their new family, Mama, Daddy Bash, Grandma Ellie, all four of them holding hands under a sun that took up half the page. In Chloe's world, family was simple. You loved people, you forgave them, you held their hands. In the adult world, it was more complicated. Hurt ran deep. Trust, once shattered, took years to rebuild. Some wounds never fully healed. I don't know, she said honestly. But we decide together. That's the rule now, right? No more secrets. No more decisions made in isolation. We figure it out together. Together, Sebastian repeated, and the word sounded like a promise. Chloe looked up from her drawing, called out, Mama, are we going to see Grandma Ellie soon? I miss her cookies. And she promised to teach me chess, but we haven't gone back yet. The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor had destroyed their relationship, had lied for 6 years, had kept Sebastian from his daughter. But she was also Grandma Ellie to a 5-year-old who didn't understand adult complications, who just knew that the nice lady at the big house made excellent cookies and listened to her stories about whales. Some secrets destroy families. Others build new ones from the broken pieces. The question is, which kind is this? But remember to always stay golden.